The New York Giants veterans are in the house for training camp to begin answering some lingering off-season questions. We're breaking it all down with special guest Ed Valentine of Big Blue View coming up next here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com today to get started. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all of my written work. And as always, we welcome on in our Blue Crew community members, our everydayers, our newcomers, and everybody in between. And we thank you for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And if you are making us your first listen of the day, we appreciate that as well. All right, Giant fans, training camp is here. If you are watching this on Tuesday, the Giants veterans reporting to camp. First practice is going to be Wednesday. I will be there, as well as this special guest of mine. You all know him. You all love him, I think. Ed Valentine of Big Blue View. Ed, welcome, my friend.
Thanks for having me, Patty. You know, whether they love me or whether they hate me, as long as they listen to me and as long as they read and comment, that's all good. It's all good.
Right. Well, that's good enough. All right. So, Giant fans, we're going to talk about the roster, the state of the Giants roster, very heavily made over in the offseason. We'll look at the storylines for training camp, and we will also discuss any concerns or predictions that we might have. So we got a lot to cover. Let's get into it. Ed, let's start off with the state of the roster. How do you feel about this 90-man roster at this juncture?
Patty, during the summer, our quote unquote summer vacation, I hear you. I did a position by position review of the roster. And the way that I look at it is, I think you can make an argument that the Giants are either clearly better or potentially better, based on, whatever factors you want to talk about. Like at wide receiver, I think the quarterback play can potentially make a wide receiver room that's basically the same as it was last year, better than it was in 2024. But for me, I think it's the roster's either clearly better or potentially better every place. So, I mean, whether that's enough to jump from 3 wins to 10 wins is another argument, especially with the schedule. But I think this is a better football team, barring a handful of critical injuries.
When you say better, do you mean in terms of fit of the talent, or are you referring to something else?
I'm basically referring to depth and quality of talent. You've got Paulson Daboll at corner, which vastly upgrades that room. A second year for Drew Phillips. You've got Javon Holland, who's a much better, you used the word fit. I think Javon Holland probably fits Shane Bowen's defense better than Jason Pinnock did. You've got all the depth that you've got now, along the front 7. You've got improved depth at the offensive line. You've got a complement to Tyrone Tracy at running back. You've got 4 tight ends that could make the roster. I don't know if they all will, and you've got whatever you think of Russell Wilson, whatever you think of Jameis Winston, whether you were a fan of the Jackson Dart pick or not, you've got an improved quarterback room. So you've got improvements all across the roster. What it all translates to, who knows?
And in terms of the defense, we talk about the upgrades, and the defense got a lot of upgrades this offseason, but how how important do you think it's going to be for this unit that, in addition to the talent they brought in, the fact that this is year 2 of pretty much the same system?
I think Shane Bowen talked a little bit about that in the spring, Patty. Part of that is players learning Shane Bowen and also Shane Bowen learning players. I think we've talked during the offseason about, a couple of the guys, particularly, Tay Banks, who was drafted for a Wink Martindale defense that relied heavily on press man coverage. And while the Giants played a fair amount, I think they were in the top 25 or 30% in the league in man coverage last year. Not a lot of that was press. Not a lot of that was playing to Tay Banks' strengths. Paulson Adebo happens to be a press man corner. So I think we're going to find out, how flexible Shane Bowen is, just in terms of how willing he is to say, this isn't what I normally do, but this is what these guys do best. And I think that I don't think there's any doubt this defense will be better. Just based on talent alone, it's going to be better. How much better might be dependent on whether Shane Bowen is willing to take himself out of his own comfort zone and do things he wouldn't normally do, to play to guys' strengths a little bit.
And let's talk about the offensive line, because that, until further notice, continues to be a topic of discussion, a question mark. It sounds like, or at least it did at the end of the spring, that they were going to run it back with the same 5 that they started the season with last year. And I had done a breakdown using some stats from True Media, saying that while that line was probably the best combination, it wasn't the greatest in terms of pressures and sacks allowed and production and whatnot. So that being said, you look at what they have done, the Evan Neal factor being a wild card, I think. Do you think it would behoove them to maybe get Evan Neal into the lineup, maybe at left guard next to Andrew Thomas, then shift John Runyon Jr. over to right guard and have Greg Van Roten as your backup? Or are you happy with this combination that they look like they're going to run it back with?
Patty, I think the best case scenario for the New York Giants in 2025 is that Evan Neal wins a guard job. Now, we can argue about whether it should be left guard or whether it should be right guard or whatever, but I think best case scenario is that you replace a 35-year-old placeholder in Greg Van Roten with a 25-year-old guy in Evan Neal, who's potentially a road grading run blocker and potentially, whose weaknesses in footwork can be masked, inside. That's the best case scenario, because then you have a 25-year-old player who, if he starts and plays well, you can sign to a second contract, and he can help anchor the inside of that line, for years to come. Plus, it makes Van Roten, something that's important, a quality backup swing player. You mentioned the idea of John Runyon moving from left to right. And I understand it because, I think Evan Neal played left guard at Alabama and he played left tackle at Alabama. But here's my objection to that. The Giants signed John Runyon Jr. last year and told him he was going to play right guard. He practiced all spring, half of training camp at right guard. And then they said, oh, hey, we got Greg Van Roten now. Why don't you go play left guard? Which he could do. You're going to do that to him again halfway through training camp? You're going to move him from left guard over to right guard halfway through training camp? I just, why keep playing musical chairs with the guy? If there's one opening and it's at right guard, see if Evan Neal can win that job, leave John Runyon alone, and see if he can have a better year with 2 healthy shoulders.
Even though Evan Neal has basically done a lot of work at left guard, you still
He's
feel that
played.
way?
he's played both in the spring, if I recall. He's been
But
on both
primarily
sides, but he's also been playing on the right side for the last 3 years. For me, like I said, they might go that way, Patty. If Evan Neal wins a job, they might go that way. But my issue with it is if they're going to go that way, if they want Evan Neal to compete for the left guard job, then I want to see John Runyon at right guard on day one of training camp. I don't want to see him move to right guard 3 weeks from now. I want to see him at right guard on day one of camp. And let's just clearly say there's a competition for the left guard job.
Yeah.
So that because we've seen it the last 2 years, Patty. They went into a week before the Dallas game in 2023. They had no idea how they were going to align their offensive line because they spent the entire summer moving guys around every 2 snaps. And last year, like I said, they moved, they switched the alignment, halfway through training camp, and it just doesn't help.
No, it definitely doesn't, and especially when you consider last year, they had injuries, which further jumbled everything. And although, again, that initial starting offensive line looked good, it probably could use some upgrades across the board, I would think.
Absolutely. And we don't know how it's going to work out, Patty, but in terms of the offensive line, we know that Andrew Thomas is the critical piece to that. If Andrew Thomas can play 17 games or 15 games and be healthy most of that time, then the Giants will have a competent offensive line. If he's out there, they'll be competent. If he's not out there, at least this year, none of us know if James Hudson can actually play. But at least they have a plan with a real tackle, as a swing guy. And they added Marcus Bowe, and we'll see what he turns into. But it feels like they at least have a plan that makes more sense.
Absolutely. All right. We're talking with Ed Valentine of Big Blue View. When we come back, we'll continue our preview of New York Giants training camp. The Giants veterans reporting on Tuesday. First practice is Wednesday. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
This episode is brought to you by Rougiette. I know that you've probably heard of Viagra and Cialis, maybe even tried them, but if you're looking for something that goes beyond the usual pill, then it's time to meet Rougiette Ready. Their 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue, kicks in fast, on average in about 15 minutes, while some of those usual pills can take up to hours, and the effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can always stay confident in control when the moment is right. And it's all completely online. You can read real customer reviews on their website, and over 150,000 men have already made the switch. Just head over to Rougiette.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, and manufacturing review. Please visit the Rougiette website for full safety information.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, with special guest Ed Valentine. And tomorrow we start our training camp reports. So we will have a show for you, whether it be a full show or a partial show on the weekends. If the Giants have a practice, we'll have a report for you. Hope you will tune in. And of course, check out New York Giants on SI. We'll have written stuff up there. And of course, I think Ed Valentine's going to be doing some work over on training camp too, right, Ed? Just a little bit.
Just a little bit, and against my better judgment, I'm up here at our summer home up in the Adirondacks, and I'd really kind of like to keep dipping my toes in the lake, but football beckons, and it is what it is.
Yes, it is. And besides, somebody's got to keep an eye on you to keep you out of trouble. So I guess that's going to be my
Why? Job. I never make any trouble, Patty.
You don't believe them, folks. And you guys think I have it easy, right? Heavy is the head that wears the crown. But anyway, we're talking with Ed Valentine, New York Giants at training camp starting tomorrow. They will have their first practice. And Ed, you look at some of these storylines that are surrounding the Giants, and we'll get to those in a minute. But I want to ask you a generic question. I want to ask you your thoughts about mistakes that maybe Brian Daboll has made in the past when it has come to the summer. And what does he need to avoid that maybe he has kind of fallen into the habit of doing the last couple of years?
Well, it's interesting, Patty, because I've been thinking about that a lot. And I've actually been talking about it a little bit on my own show. Go back, Brian Daboll was coach of the year in 2022. Brian Daboll had a fantastic year. He got every drop of talent possible out of Daniel Jones. He took a roster, with help from some helpful in-season additions, from the front office. He took a roster that probably wasn't a playoff roster. I think that we know now wasn't really a playoff roster, and he got a playoff win out of that team. But you and I probably talked about this. You go to 2023, you go to the spring, you go to the summer. Shoot, Patty, I think we went to the spring, and I think a third of the roster was wearing red jerseys and either not practicing or basically walking around the field stretching. And I thought Brian Daboll's mistake in 2023, and maybe Joe Shane's also in terms of roster building in 2023, was to think that they weren't still at the beginning of a rebuild, to think that what they had was a playoff competitive football team. Now, you can treat the team that way. I thought Brian Daboll didn't really use the 2023 offseason and maybe training camp and preseason as well to really get that team ready. I think all he cared about was getting that team to week one with healthy bodies. Now, you can do that, and that's a little bit of the old Bill Belichick, New England Patriots, first quarter of the season doesn't matter philosophy. You can do that when you're an established year in and year out playoff team, when you have Tom Brady, and when you're going to win some of those first 3 or 4 games just because you have more talent than the other guys do. You can't do that when you're the New York Giants and you're not going to be favored in a lot of those games, and losing 3 of those first 4 games or all 4 of those first 4 games is going to bury your season. And I thought Daboll was a little bit better last year, and maybe some of that was only because they felt like Daniel Jones had to get as many 11 on 11 reps as possible to try to get ready for the season. But I still think you've got to push your starting guys a little bit harder in training camp, give them a few more reps, turn up the intensity. You've got to play guys a little bit more in preseason. And Daboll said something in the spring. He said, when we get to training camp, I'm not going to be as tolerant of mistakes. You know what? The next time Brian Daboll dresses down a player on the field during a practice in front of the media will be the first time that I've heard it. Malik Neighbors, for example, what did he lead the league last year in illegal formation penalties or whatever it was, pre-snap penalties from the wide receiver position. What I want to see from Brian Daboll is the first time Malik Neighbors has a false start or an illegal formation in training camp, I want to see Brian Daboll dress down the best player on his roster. That will tell me that he's serious about this. I won't tolerate mistakes in training camp stuff. I don't think I've seen it in 3 years from Daboll.
Yeah.
And I think there's a standard that needs to be set, that Bill Belichick was always, we always heard the player that Bill Belichick yelled at the most, the player he held to the highest standard, the player he gave the hardest time during practice was Tom Brady. Mm-hmm. And Brian Daboll saw some of that. because he worked for Belichick for a number of years. Where is it? I think that would benefit the football team. Now there's a line, you can't go too far, but just once I'd love to see it.
Yeah, definitely. Or just pull them off the field or whatnot. But you're right,
Something.
you can't afford to come out of the gate, especially 2 games against NFC East opponents. They go 0-2, and that's not good. That's not
Patty, look at it this way. Everybody says, "Oh, the schedule is so difficult and this and that." The schedule, and yes, on paper it's incredibly difficult. But you look at the 2 games against the Commanders last year. Those 2 games were lost by the Giants by a total of 8 points. The 2 games against the Cowboys were lost by a total of 11 points. If we're sitting here, and I said a few minutes ago, the Giants have a better roster than they did a year ago. They should have better quarterback play than they did a year ago. If they come out of the gate ready to play, they won't be favored in either one of those games. But why can't they win those games? Why can't they? They didn't get blown out by those teams last year. So you got to win at least one of those games. And you can't come out of the gate and by 5 minutes into the game, like they did the last 2 years, by 5 minutes into the game, they looked like a complete and utter disaster and a complete and utter embarrassment. You can't do that again.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with you. They've got to go at least, they've got to split those games. If they go 0-2, for all intents and purposes, that's not going to be good. I think that's
No, it's not.
for the season. And to that end, Ed, we have seen rather the last couple of years, the Giants have come out of the chute slowly, looking like they're still in training camp. So with that said, Brian Daboll has had a practice of where they have joint practices, then he puts the starters out of the game. But how important do you think it is for them, the starters and the key reserves, to get game snaps every single game in preseason this year?
I think it's important for them to get snaps in at least 2 of those games, Patty. And the more I have thought about this with the 3-game preseason, the more I have come to think that not only the Giants, but NFL teams do this wrong. Okay? Because what you consider the showcase game, the game where starters play the most snaps, is usually, even now, it's the second preseason game. Okay? And then none of the starters play in the third preseason game. Go look at the calendar, Patty. If you do it that way, it's 22 days from the second preseason game to the season opener. That's more than 3 weeks without players doing anything truly competitive. Without them doing anything. I mean, they're practicing, but they're not, but it's different. There's no joint practices after that second week. There's how are you prepared for a football season if you haven't really truly done anything competitive for more than 3 weeks? It's no wonder the football looks lousy. It's no wonder guys pull hamstrings. It's no wonder they pull groin muscles and all of that. I think the third week of preseason, that final preseason game, should be the one where starters go and play a half or play into the second half. That's not the way NFL teams do it. But if I really cared about being ready for week 1, it's the way I would do it.
Yeah, I agree. Make that your dress rehearsal.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, if you wanted to do week 1 of the preseason, week 3, and take week 2 and say, well, we've got the joint practices, I can live with that. But I definitely agree that week 1 and week 3 have to have a healthy dose of the starters and the reserves. This is an ad by BetterHelp. Workplace stress is at an all-time high. 61% of the global workforce is reporting higher than normal stress levels. This summer is the perfect time to take small steps to focus on your wellness and manage the challenges that come with your workday. Of course, most of us just can't quit our jobs and take endless vacations, but we can start small, whether it's getting outside for a few minutes, adding movement into your day, or talking to someone who can help you navigate life's challenges. That's where BetterHelp comes in. The flexibility of online therapy makes it easy to fit sessions into a busy schedule no matter where you are. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Unwind from work with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/locked on. That's betterhelp, HELP.com/locked on. Hey, Giant fans, summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game more exciting. You're already following the action, so why not make it a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must watch events. New to FanDuel? New customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit fanduel.com/locked on to get started. All right, Ed, we haven't talked about really in detail the quarterback situation. I want to get your take on this because a lot of people in the media, some fans are just saying, rip the bandage off, let Jackson Dart compete for the starting job. I am of the opinion that Jackson Dart is not ready to compete for the starting job. He's a rookie. There's things he has to work on. Where do you stand on that debate?
Well, I absolutely agree with you, Patty. I think there's a lot of people, like you said, who say, "Oh, maybe Dart can win the job from Russell Wilson in training camp." And the first thing I'll say is this: all right, Russell Wilson, way back in 2012, went into Seattle as a third-round pick. Nobody expected him to be the starter week one. He won that job. But Russell Wilson's competition was Matt Flynn, a career backup who made a big paycheck off of one good game. And in Buffalo, when Josh Allen was a rookie, they didn't want Josh Allen to play right away. And Josh Allen's first season was difficult. But, Josh Allen, they watched Nathan Peterman play in Buffalo for half a game and realized, what's the point? Russell Wilson is not Nathan Peterman, and Russell Wilson is not Matt Flynn. He's not what he used to be either, but he's not those guys. He is still a competent, capable quarterback, who I've said it before and I'll say it again. He's better than Daniel Jones, which makes him the best quarterback the Giants have had since Eli Manning. And it's also, all of that aside, I talked to Matt Waldman of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio, who's a great analyst of quarterback play. Had the privilege of talking to Jordan Palmer, who's the quarterback coach for Josh Allen and a lot of other guys. I think Joe Burrow and a lot of other big name quarterbacks. And they both said this quarterback room is set up perfectly for Jackson Dart, and that it is incredibly beneficial for Jackson Dart, who's 21 years old, to soak up knowledge from Wilson and Winston, and as a 21-year-old kid, to just have time to get used to his surroundings, to get used to his life, to get used to being on his own, in New Jersey, to get used to all of the things that he has to deal with as a professional athlete without having to worry about answering the media on Wednesdays after he played a lousy game, at least for the first part of his career. There's a lot of benefits to him just sitting and soaking it in, for a while. And I fully believe that the Giants should get Jackson Dart into the starting lineup at some point this year, if it makes sense at all, because he's your guy in 2026. He has to be. He has to be and giving him somewhat of an opportunity to get his feet wet and hit the ground running next year is a good thing, but it shouldn't be week one. Let him take his time. Let him be ready when you put him out there.
Yeah, I actually said, and I have written this several times, that I could see Jackson Dart at some point leapfrogging over Jameis Winston as quarterback 2, because if he's going to be quarterback 3, he's going to be the emergency quarterback, and he's not getting any chance of having
Right.
snaps. At least if you move him to quarterback 2 at some point, you can put him in the game in a mop-up role if need be, just to get him some snaps, some real-life snaps,
Right.
which will help him down the line.
And
All right.
if you were to, the only other thing I'll say about that is if you were to get in a situation, if you're comfortable with him as the backup, if you were to get in a situation where Russell Wilson got hurt and Dart had to play and he showed you that he's not quite ready, the following week, if you need another starter, you can always jump Jameis Winston, to the starting role. So yeah, I like that idea as well when you think he's ready to get on the field, at least some.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Ed, final question for you. There's a lot of optimism about this Giants roster. A lot of people feel good about where things are going. But for you, what is your biggest question that you would like to see answered by the time training camp wraps up?
Patty, I did a thing at Big Blue View, 90-man roster rankings. And, that's a little bit ridiculous once you get past 20 or 25 guys. Ranking the rest of the roster is a little bit ridiculous. I get that. But part of the reason I did it was to have an opportunity to be able to comment about every player that's going to training camp. And I listed Andrew Thomas not as number 1 on that roster. I think he's number 3 in those rankings. But for me, Andrew Thomas might be the most important Giant right now, because if he's on the field for 17 games, even if he's, the last 2 years when he did play, he wasn't the Andrew Thomas of 2022, because I think he was playing through some injuries, but he was still the best lineman that they had. And like I said, if he plays, they're at least competent on the offensive line every week that he's in the lineup. And we didn't see him. The bothersome thing for me, this is a 320-pound man with a Lisfranc injury. We didn't see him not only on the field during the spring, or not only in practice, but we didn't see him come outside. And maybe once I remember seeing him come outside. And we saw Malik Neighbors come outside a lot. We saw some of the other guys who were rehabbing injuries come outside. But that bothers me a little bit. I mean, from what I've heard, that was, precautionary, and they're building up strength and doing all those things that they say when they're rehabbing a player, and that there's nothing to worry about. But I need to see it. I need to see Andrew Thomas practice regularly and look like Andrew Thomas.
Yeah, and the fact that Andrew Thomas was able to throw out the first pitch at a Yankee game, but yet he wasn't able to come out just to stand, and he was pushing off that foot. So,
Yeah.
What's going on there,
Yeah, I just want to, you ask people about injuries and they will tell you that they will tell you what they want you to hear.
Right.
But I want to see Andrew Thomas on the field. I want to see him get a decent amount of reps. They'll protect him a little bit, but I want to see how he moves, how he looks, and I want to be convinced that he'll be ready to be on the field week 1.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. He's a key player for sure, because we saw how that offensive line fell apart once he went down, and we don't need to repeat that.
Right.
Sure.
No offense to James Hudson.
Right.
But I'd actually rather not find out if he's a decent left tackle.
Yeah, I'm with you. Definitely. Again, no offense to anybody for that matter. Might be competing for that. But and along those lines, Ed, just real quick, I feel the same way about Bobby Okereke. Now, Bobby Okereke, he practiced earlier in the spring, talked about how good he felt, and then suddenly we didn't see him for like the back half of the spring.
Right. We didn't see him maybe the last OTA that we were at, and we didn't see him on the field at mandatory minicamp. And I think you may have said this in your mailbag over the weekend, Patty. I mean, that leads you to think one of two things. Either the back injury, the herniated disc that he had, is again a problem. That's the kind of thing that can recur, or even if you have one of those things surgically repaired, it doesn't mean that you're not susceptible to having another one. I've been there, done that. I get it. Or if he came up with another injury. And we won't know. We won't know until we see these guys on the field. But that's kind of a mystery. And I mean, shoot, all the stuff we heard about Okereke, and maybe not everyone in the organization's a fan of Okereke and all of that. I don't know what there is to that, but Bobby Okereke's status on the defensive side of the ball is obviously something to watch.
Right, definitely. All right. So just to wrap things up, folks, on Tuesday at some point, we'll probably get a list of any players who start the year on PUP, and that will be active PUP, meaning they'll count against the 90-man roster. We won't know which guys are going to actually practice. Guys that passed their physical but maybe are held back. That we won't find out until we get to camp on Wednesday. Wednesday, there'll be Joe Shane and Brian Daboll. They'll have their annual joint presser to welcome everybody back and give us no answers. I mean, a lot of words, but not necessarily answers. But so yeah, it all gets started on Wednesday. I'll have shows for you. Like I said, I'm sure Ed will have shows for you. And of course, make sure you check out Big Blue View and New York Giants on SI for all the written stuff that we're going to be doing. And we're going to be doing quite a lot, I'm sure. So for Ed Valentine, I'm Patricia Traina. Giant fans, thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Now, before we say goodbye, please make sure you check out the Locked On NFL Top 100 voted on by the Locked On NFL hosts. It's available on Locked On NFL Today and wherever you get your podcasts. Check it out. And if you want to see what my reaction was to where the Giants placed, check out last Thursday's show. I wasn't too happy with some of the placements, but I'll let you see that if you want to check that out. All right. For Ed Valentine, I'm Patricia Traina. Giant fans, we'll see you tomorrow.